Last count, the world population was almost 7 billion, yet there are still times you can feel alone. And National Geographic Adventurer of the Year, Alastair Humphreys, likes to adventure alone. But not on his last trip, when he took his friend and adventure virgin, Chris, along with him. Crossing Iceland is Alastair's new film, and he's here at the Adventure Film Festival to tell us more about it. So in the impulsive sensation seeking score, you got 9 out of 10, which is actually really quite high. It's pretty much way above average. And that, for me, kind of would indicate you're the kind of person who needs change, contrast, kind of juxtaposition. Now, in the film you made in Iceland, I really enjoyed the bits where you cut between images of the natural beauty, very sort of serene, through to this hard physical endeavour you were doing, and it's this contrast all the way through. And is that something that's really important to your adventures, this kind of contrast?
Yeah, I think it is. I certainly agree with you that I feel I need a variety of things and chop and change quite often. And then in terms of my journeys, I really enjoy things that push myself physically hard and therefore mentally pushing myself. But I also appreciate doing it in very beautiful, wild places where I can try to slow down from the madness of normal life and make my mind a bit stiller. So yeah, I like doing difficult things in beautiful and serene places.
Yeah, I mean, is that in the film we see you with the inflatable rafts, these canoes, you know, so obviously doing almost a bit of whitewater rafting, and you mentioned you didn't know when there was going to be a waterfall, yet the next image we see is you standing on the waterfall, admiring it and seeing the beauty of it. And again, there's sort of something which is incredibly dangerous and something which is actually quite beautiful as well. I mean, were there many moments like that throughout the Iceland adventure?
Yeah, Iceland was one of my very favourite adventures for exactly that reason, in that it was a very difficult trip, and a lot of what I was doing was unknown to me, and so was a lot of uncertainty and nervousness and risk and difficulty. But the landscape was just so awesome in the literal sense of that word. It was just one of the most majestic places that I've been. I loved Iceland. It's brilliant.
Yeah. So another score you got was 2 out of 10 on the sociability scale. Now, it doesn't mean you're not a nice bloke, because you obviously are, but it really struck a chord with me that in your adventures you're physically self-sufficient. You take all your own equipment, all your own food, but does this continue into being mentally self-sufficient as well? Do you feel that you're self-contained as a person?
I think I'm a little bit of both. Historically in my life, I've always been someone who likes doing stuff with other people, and I enjoy socialising with people. And as a kid, I used to get very bored when I was on my own. My mum tells me. But then my first massive trip was cycling around the world, which I did on my own. So I spent 4 years more or less entirely on my own, having to make my own decisions and trust in myself. And through that trip, I found it difficult, but I found it very rewarding being on my own. And through that, I suppose I've come to learn to enjoy being on my own. And now in terms of my trips, I roughly try and alternate doing one on my own and then one with someone else, and there's pros and cons of both approaches to that.
I mean, could you tell us a little bit about what the pros and cons are? For example, obviously this trip was with Chris, and does the nature of your thrill and adventure change considerably if you're sharing that experience with somebody?
Yeah, it changes a lot when you're with someone else. Being solo is far more difficult, it's more stressful, the lows are much lower, but I think the highs are higher. You get the real burst of solitude, and if you succeed by something on your own, then that's purely down to you, so the sense of achievement feels greater. Doing it with someone else is more fun. That's the simple side of it. You laugh more, you have fun, you talk, you enjoy it. It's more of a pleasant experience, and I'm a real masochist with the things that I do, and I quite enjoy deliberately having a miserable time. But when you do something with someone else, it's just fun, which is a good thing to have in life. So I went with Chris because he's a good guy, he's very funny, and because it was my first venture into trying to film a project, and he's a photographer, so I deliberately chose him to do the trip because we would both be interested in taking it slow enough to try and film it beautifully.
I mean, that takes me on to the photography. I mean, you scored 8 out of 10 on the activity scale, which means that you like new challenges, competition, you're kind of a fidgety bloke. You want to be doing stuff all the time. And I wondered whether introducing photography, because obviously this Icelandic trip was the first one that you've shot, and very beautifully, whether that challenge of photographing, for example, when you're rehydrating spaghetti, you're filming yourself. You're not just relaxing, you're doing something, you're making a film. Is this something you've enjoyed doing, and does it add an extra dimension to your adventures now, do you think?
Yeah, it certainly forces me to think about the trip in a different way, and it's not just experiencing it for myself, it's looking at the trip thinking, how can I tell this story? Which is something I've always enjoyed doing since I began. I began originally wanting to write about my trips, and that forces you to think about it. And then after the writing, then I wanted to learn photography, so I did night school, and then I started to photograph my trips, trying to tell a story like that. And then the next step was filming them and trying to think, how can I communicate this experience I'm having with a wider audience at home? So yeah, certainly it helps pass the time, giving me extra things to think about.
Yeah. I know on your website you've got heaps of other videos. I think there's one living like a caveman, I can't remember, but being very self-sufficient. And are you aware of an audience? So, you know, when you're filming these activities, are you aware of trying to take an audience on a journey with you, or to entertain them, or to even thrill them? I mean, why do you like to share stuff with people?
I think it's become, as this adventuring life started to become a job for me, therefore there was a more of a need to tell a story for those reasons, just in terms of it being a job. But the more that I've done the blogging and the speaking and the writing about things, I've started to become a little bit evangelical about it all as well. And these adventures have done so much for my life and my self-confidence. For so many good things have come to me through these adventures that I now and I see myself as a very normal person, very normal, just like the people who read my website, and I feel more and more that I want to try and share the good things of my adventures with other people, to try and encourage them to do similar things.
So would you advocate adventuring as a way of life for others?
I'm not sure I'd advocate it as a career, because the market's saturated enough as it is, but I would certainly advocate having some sort of adventure in your life, and that then led me on to what I've been doing a lot of in the last couple of years, which is the idea of micro-adventures, these deliberately very small adventures that are accessible for everyone, that can be done on a weekend for someone with a proper job and a real life and a busy normal schedule, and yet I think that even normal busy people, if they can squeeze a little bit of adventure into their life, it adds a lot to your life. So that's the side that I've been quite evangelical about on my blog.
So Alastair, can you tell me about the first time you remember being thrilled as a little boy?
I wasn't a very thrilling boy, and I certainly was not a adrenaline junkie type of kid at all. I wasn't particularly brave or physical or anything like that, and I think through my general ineptitude, that was how I then ended up doing outdoor pursuits. They're a bit more you don't need much skill to go walk up a mountain, and when I was 8, I did what was a big challenge in my local area. It's the Yorkshire Three Peaks, which is 26 miles you have to do in 12 hours, and I did that first when I was 8, and I think that was the first sense of real achievement I got, and that basking in that glow of complete agony and exhaustion after a trip, but the sense of satisfaction and retrospective pleasure, which everything else has been built on.
You mentioned there actually an element of agony, exhaustion. I mean, there's a certain amount of sort of abuse you put on yourself in your adventures. Is it only an adventure if you've, sort of injured yourself mentally, physically in some way?
Yeah, I think if you're not miserable, then it counts as a holiday. So yeah, you need a good dose of misery, wishing you weren't there, then surprising yourself by actually getting to the finish line, and then the rose-tinted memories and the retrospective pleasures and selective amnesia, which convinces you that it was all good fun, and then you go do something new.
Now, before you go following in his footsteps, you better find out what kind of a thrill seeker you are. Visit the Nissan Juke Built to Thrill Hub to take the thrill test, and you can win some thrilling prizes.